Welcome back, everyone, to lecture number 7 on the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Now, human beings have always been fascinated by the world around them. Why is the sky blue? Why can birds fly and people can't? Where does the sun go each night? You can easily imagine generations of kids asking their parents these questions. How many of you are science majors, or how many of you are going to get an engineering degree? You also probably like to know how things work, especially your phone. How, for example, do I hear someone else's voice even though they're 1,000 miles away? How do I get my phone fixed when it's broken so that I can set up my new Tinder account? Many ancient cultures have tried to find answers to the mysteries of the natural world. The Egyptians, the Mayans, the Chinese all looked to the heavens and charted the movement of stars, for instance. They also learned how to engineer great structures from pyramids to enormous defensive walls. Muslim scholars of the Middle Ages made significant advances in mathematics and algebra in an attempt to understand their world. Indian doctors of the same period also made leaps in medicine, identifying chronic diseases and performing early surgeries. It seems to be a universal human tendency, in other words, for us to be curious about the natural world around us and to want to know more about it. In particular, it can be a big, scary, random world if you don't understand how it actually works. Figuring out how to understand and then control this big, scary world might help you and your civilization survive. For instance, if you don't want a river to flood and kill people, well, you learn how to build a dam. You don't want people to die of disease, well, you find ways to either prevent the spread of a pathogen or to find medicines to cure it. It's understandable, therefore, that during the early modern era in Europe, we see an explosion of scientific scholarship, research, and learning that becomes known as the scientific revolution. What sparked this period of rapid experimentation in Europe? Well, it's not a coincidence that the scientific revolution began during Europe's Renaissance period, as a thriving middle class began to toss aside medieval superstitions and fascination with supernatural forces, and instead began to turn to secular concerns such as making money, achieving fame, learning about how their world works around them. Renaissance scholars also resurrected learning from classical Greek and Roman writers and scientists. And they begin to say, this stuff has been buried for hundreds and hundreds of years. These Greek and Roman writers had some interesting insights into how our world works. Can we build upon those now? Another important point for understanding how these new scientific theories will begin to spread is a technological advance in the form of the printing press. This newer generation of scientific thinkers and scholars can much more easily disseminate their findings, and they can also read the work of other scientists much more easily, even if that scientist was working 1,000 miles away from their location. Finally, the scientific revolution also coincided with Europe's so-called Age of Discovery, with explorers from Columbus to Captain James Cook coming across new plants, new animals, and even human beings that they had not come into contact with prior. This is going to spark a number of questions. And as all scientists know, when you have questions, you want answers. This leads to scientific innovation. Now, we begin our discussion of the scientific revolution with several major advances in the field of astronomy. The traditional view of the universe, and one which was supported by the Roman Catholic Church, was that the universe revolved around the Earth. But a respected Polish scholar, astronomer, and mathematician by the name of Nicholas Copernicus would be the first to challenge this view of an Earth-centered universe. Through his observations of the heavens and by developing his ideas through mathematical models, Copernicus discovered that the Earth was not at the center of the cosmos. In fact, the Earth revolved around the sun, very different from the reigning belief at the time. His heliocentric or solar system, his model contradicted the ancient Greek scientist Ptolemy's geocentric model. Copernicus was a devout Catholic and was a churchman himself, so he understood the implications of his finding that basically, by advocating the idea that the earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around, that he would be challenging the known understanding of the Roman Catholic Church of the universe. So for this reason, he never weighed in on the religious implications of his research. As you can see, one of his most famous quotations, astronomy is written for astronomers. In other words, let other people debate the findings or the implications of my findings. Copernicus's discoveries were built upon by the Danish scientist Tycho Brahe and later Johannes Kepler, who continued to refine our understanding of the motion of the planets. And what Kepler determined mathematically, we will see Italian scientist Galileo Galilei be able to confirm through observation. Galileo began his work in 1609 when he eagerly read Kepler's New Astronomy. That same year, he bought a curious new Dutch invention known as a telescope. While the telescope had been around for a few years, he was the first to use it systematically to look at the heavens, and what he saw amazed even him. He saw mountains on the moon. This may not seem like a big deal, but everyone had assumed that the moon had a smooth surface. And those mountains on the moon looked a lot like the mountains here on Earth, so that brought up new questions. The next big thing he saw were planets orbiting around the planet of Jupiter. Now, of course, we know those are not planets revolving around Jupiter. They're moons, but that's what he took at the time away from his observations. And what was so interesting about that is if the planet of Jupiter had its own independent orbital system, these moons that were revolving around it, it meant that the sun could also be an independent orbital system revolving around a much larger system. And of course, we know that today with the Milky Way, that we are but one small solar system in a much, much larger system. The universe, in other words, was much bigger after Galileo's observations were confirmed. Galileo announced his findings in the Starry Messenger, which he published in 1610. And he would later go on to write a fuller explanation of his observations. But in August of 1632, less than 6 months after his dialogues on the two chief systems of the world appeared, he was convicted by the Roman Catholic Church of, quote, grave suspicion of heresy, unquote. His work was even placed on the Index of Forbidden Books, and it remained there until 1757. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church did not want the understanding of the universe to change as a result of this newest wave of scientific inquiry. Remember, this is shortly after the Protestant Reformation and the big split in Western Christianity. So the Roman Catholic Church is not in the mood to have yet another challenge to its authority. The Catholic Church demanded on pain of death that Galileo recant his views. In the end, he was placed under house arrest near Florence, where he died there 8 years later. So we're already seeing a conflict between faith on the one hand and human reason and scientific inquiry on the other appearing during the early scientific revolution. And key to all of these new discoveries will be new methods of exploring the world, in particular the scientific method. The development of a systematic and analytical way of analyzing data from the world around you, this development of the scientific method, was many, many centuries in the making, and many cultures will contribute to this process. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, for example, often regarded as sort of the father of science, helped to craft early notions of an empirical view of the world based upon your observations. His work will be supported by a number of Arab scholars during the Islamic Golden Age, such as Ibn al-Haytham, who advanced the fields of optics and mathematics. The English philosopher and scientist Francis Bacon will help to develop the inductive reasoning method. And this, in a nutshell, is moving from specific observations to making a more generalized statement. So an example of this would be, this plant is green. That's the specific statement of this particular plant is green. And then saying all plants are green. But of course, this falls apart because not all plants are green. So other ways of trying to reason through understanding the data that you collect in the world around you would need to be developed. French philosopher René Descartes, for example, will develop the deductive reasoning model. And in this way, he wanted to move from general observations to the specific. For example, all birds can fly, and then you test that. And obviously, since not all birds can fly, that's not the case. But you test it to make predictions. And then you compare that to individual birds. So after a while, the general falls apart, and then you have to start to become more specific. Ostriches don't fly, for example. Penguins don't fly, for instance. Certainly leaning more towards the deductive reasoning side was Sir Isaac Newton of England. Newton was someone that dedicated quite literally his life to the service of trying to understand the world around him. He never married. He apparently was a very reclusive sort of person. He preferred to spend time behind closed doors, just running his experiments in his laboratory. He's not interested in being anybody's friend. He also quarreled violently with other scientists who challenged his findings, so he's kind of a prickly sort. He would definitely get on his report card in elementary school, does not play well with others. But he was a solitary genius who excelled in many different scientific endeavors. In his best-known work, Principia Mathematica, he established the three basic laws of motion. The law of inertia, a body at rest stays at rest unless moved. The rate of change of motion of an object is proportional to the force acting upon it. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Integral to all of this was his law of gravity. But gravity is invisible, right? You can't measure it. It doesn't cast a shadow. How do you prove its existence? Well, he did a little thing like invent a whole new field of mathematics, calculus, to prove the existence of gravity. So yeah, Newton with the big brain. Some of the newest discoveries in the scientific revolution will be based upon new technology. So we have yet another level of scholarship here, those who create the tools and gadgets that other scientists will utilize to actually measure and understand the world around them. For instance, while Galileo trained his new optical device on the stars and discovered new worlds in outer space, another optical device was being used to discover equally dramatic worlds in tiny drops of water. The microscope was invented by Anton von Leeuwenhoek. We also have the invention of the thermometer, the mercury thermometer by Gabriel Fahrenheit, to take measurements of ambient temperature. The use of the stethoscope for physicians to be able to listen to the condition of your lungs, for example, or to listen to your heartbeat. Or William Harvey's experiments on the circulation of the blood system and the importance of the heart to keeping the circulatory system up and running in the human body. As for sharing all of this new knowledge that's coming to light, we'll see some of it will be printed thanks to the printing press and disseminated to an increasingly highly literate public throughout the continent. We'll also see that universities will sponsor the work of numerous scientists. And then there's the importance of a number of new scientific associations. Several new scientific societies, such as the Royal Society of London or the Paris Academy of Sciences, will be established so that scientists could communicate with one another. They could share their findings. They could make sure that they weren't duplicating the work of someone else, right, but rather build upon the work of other scholars. And these academic groups become of signal importance to generations of future scholars, no less than Isaac Newton said, if I've seen further, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants, right, that he was building upon prior knowledge. So what was the upshot of all of this new scientific discovery taking place? Well, there's several significant effects of the scientific revolution on pre-modern Europe. To begin with, it will have a side effect of weakening the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. In other words, people stopped relying exclusively on the church's explanation for how the cosmos worked, and they instead started to look in much more interest at what many of these scientists were discovering. As men like Newton discovered certain principles, certain laws governing the cosmos, the universe was being demystified. People were now feeling like they were coming to understand the world not through the lens of their spirituality, but through the lens of their reason, and knowledge. We'll pick up with the effects of the scientific revolution in the second part of this lecture.